Hello and welcome back. This is Jennifer McGuire and thank you so much for stopping by. Today I'm going to show you how to create a faux embossing folder using your dies. Now this was inspired because I did faux embossing folders using stamps over in the recent online card class called Spring Card Camp. That's an online card class that I'm doing with Christina Werner and lots of fun guests, and I will provide a link for that below. In that class, I show how to turn your stamps into creating a faux embossing folder. Today, we're going to use our dies. This is a very easy technique and something that allows you to create a tool that can be used over and over again. It also works really well with whatever dies you may have on hand. I use this technique to create some soft inked texture on the background of my cards today. So let's get started with this set of cards that you see here. I actually did a bunch of them in different colors and I'll show them all to you. For this, I used the Altenew Dog Rose panel dies. These are new. They're smaller and fit nicely in the center of a card. This is panel A and panel B, and you can use the die cuts layered together to create a really beautiful panel, and I'll show you an example of that in a little bit. But first, I wanted to show you how you can use these dies to create faux embossing folders to add texture to your cards. For this technique, you will need a die cut machine. Today, I decided to use my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cut machine, which is a wonderful manual machine. I will also be using magnetic paper. So this is super thin. I actually took it out of my die packaging for some dies that I got from Ellen Hudson's Essential by Ellen die sets. A lot of dies come with this thin material and you can just use it for this instead of for your packaging. You can also buy thin magnetic paper too, but if you don't have this somewhere in your packaging to recycle, you could instead use stacks of cardstock, and I'll talk about that later. But for this, I find this magnetic paper die cuts nicely and works great for this technique. So what I'm going to do is use that die that I showed you from Altenew and die cut this magnetic paper. I found if I ran it back and forth a couple times through my machine, it ended up cutting into it enough that I could pop the pieces out. You may need to use a shim with whatever die cut machine you're using. The reason I chose to use magnetic paper for this is it's thicker and it holds up really well. If you don't have this, you could use a few stacked die cuts instead, so maybe 5 die cuts or 4 depending on how thick your cardstock is. I've done that in a technique video before and I'll link to that video up here if you want to check it out. I just find this technique much easier. Okay, so now here I have both of the Dog Rose panel dies cut out. I ended up only using this one in my right hand right now, but I did want to show you that you can layer them together if you wanted. So I'll just be using the one on the left. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our die cut machine and look at what the instructions say for using a die to make an impression. We're going to instead use our magnetic die cut to make the impression. So I'm going to take my tan Spellbinders Embossing Mat, which I use a lot, and it's a handy way to make an impression instead of die cut. Then I'm going to put a piece of regular white cardstock on it. I'm using a very heavyweight white cardstock from Nina. Then I put my die cut and then my embossing plate on top of that. This is the setup that my instructions say to use when in making an impression with the die, but I'm using the magnetic paper instead. And check that out. You have a beautiful deep impression into the cardstock. That is absolutely beautiful. So it looks like I used an embossing folder, but I actually used a die cut. Now let's step it up and add ink to the die cut. I used a little temporary adhesive to adhere my die cut to that blue embossing plate just so it wouldn't move. Now I am lightly rubbing die ink over that die cut. I'm trying to get ink only on the die cut, not the blue plate. I'll lay this onto my cardstock that's on the embossing mat, run that back and forth through my machine, and that presses that ink into the deeper parts of our impression, which is super cool. It looks like a letterpress. So I thought I'd do another one, and I end up doing quite a few backgrounds, which you'll see in the cards in a little bit. But you're able to use this die cut over and over again to make lots of impressions and transfer any color ink you want. I do like the look of softer color inks for this, but you definitely could go bold. You could use multiple colors of ink, totally up to you. Or you could flip it over, and on the back side of it, you could put ink on the raised areas by rubbing the ink pad directly on it. So here I'm going to use a softer color of ink just to show you. Again, you want to make sure you put the ink on softly so you don't ink up the background, that blue plate. You just want the ink on the die cut itself before you run it through. And it's really easy to do if you use a light hand and kind of rub the ink pad back and forth. Now, while I do this a few times, I wanted to mention, again, if you don't have a magnetic paper, instead you can use stacked die cuts, and I will link to the video showing that. I usually put a vellum die cut on top so that I'm able to take ink and transfer it for the technique that you're seeing here. But I found this was faster and handy. Now here is another example. I used the Altenew Snowflake Stars Covered Die B, which is this triangle die. It actually will cover an entire background of a card, which is super cool. I put some light pink ink on the magnetic die cut, ran that through, and checked that out. You can get subtle backgrounds with this. I tried this with many different types of dies, and I found it worked great with everything I tried. This is the Altenew Dainty Blooms Die cut. See how I'm putting just a tiny bit of adhesive on the back, just a little bit, so that it'll hold on to the blue plate. I find that temporarily adhering it to that plate, just in little bits here and there, helps in applying the ink to it. It doesn't move around. Now remember, you do also still have the option of not using ink on it before making an impression. So you can just have a very subtle look. Or this one happens to be one of my favorite. I use a super light gray ink, so it just makes the pattern stick out a bit more. Now I thought I'd make one using the Altenew Radial Stars cover die. This is a new die that I really like. I ended up not using this example in today's video, but I wanted to show it to you because this one has a lot more solid area to the die cut. So I wanted you to see the results you get with a die cut like this. See how there's a lot of solid area to it, especially there in the middle. Again, I'm just rubbing a light ink over it, and I kind of tap it too, trying not to get it on the blue plate. Then I put it right onto my white cardstock, run that back and forth through, and it gives a beautiful impression, leaving that soft ink behind. By the way, I used white cardstock, that's heavyweight, but you could try thinner weight if you want to. I found that worked fine. It doesn't matter. You just want to use a smooth white cardstock, and check that out. Such a beautiful look and a nice subtle background. Lots of texture and a little bit of color. Now that I have a bunch of backgrounds made, I wanted to show you a bunch of card examples using those backgrounds, and I have some tips for you. I again am making a bunch of cards because I'm giving a lot of them out right now, so I'll share some tips for mass producing and also getting more from a die cut. Now for my first set of examples, I use this crazy cool Altenew Zigzag Floral stamp set. I love the unique look of this. It has these zigzag images that add faux texture to the flowers, but you could skip those layers and just do a normal flower if you wanted to. This is the little inspiration guide that comes with this stamp set, and it shows some fun ideas that you can do using the set. I'll be using this for my first set of cards today. I wanted to show you the sets of colors that I'll be using for my layering here. You can pause if you want to and write them down, but these are the different colors I use throughout this video. When I do color layering, I like to get my 4 or 5 ink colors and stack them up next to me so I can reach for them and grab the one I need next very easily. It's easier than having to search for them as I go. Being prepared really makes a big difference in how fast I can make my cards. Speaking of being prepared, off screen I created a bunch of white die cuts using the coordinating dies to the flowers and leaves from the Zigzag Floral stamp set. And I have them in this clear tray. I'll link to the one that I use. I find it really handy to help me stay organized. I kept one of the negative spaces and I put tape on the back of the openings. I'm putting that into my stamping tool. This will be a little template that will allow me to quickly stamp on several die cuts. I'm going to start with the flowers, and I pop a couple die cuts into the negative space. Now I'm starting with the first layer of that flower. According to the Altenew packaging, it is this large zigzag image, which gives a really cool look. So I'm lining up that image with the die cuts in my stamping tool. Sorry, my head gets in the way, but that's the best way to figure out if I have it lined up. Now I'm closing the door on my MISTI to grab those stamps, and now we can start stamping on all of my die cuts. Now this is a very quick way to do this because you can easily stamp on the die cut, take the die cut out, pop in a new one, stamp, and continue over and over. I have found over the years this is significantly faster for me than stamping everything and then lining up the coordinating dies with each of my stamped images afterwards. So I continue to stamp on all of my die cuts using the different color combinations I showed you earlier. I used the lightest color ink for this layer. That light color ink happens to be the same color ink that I used to make my impressions with the magnetic dies earlier. So now these flowers will match great with the impressions that we created with the ink earlier on. So it's a great way to make sure everything matches. Use the same colors of ink. Okay, now I'm coming in with the second layer. This is a solid layer that'll allow some of that lighter color zigzag to show through. Now I am making multiple cards once again today. If you're only doing a single card, I still think it's helpful to do this template because it just allows you to easily move from die cut to die cut, but it's totally up to you. Okay, so I went ahead and did that second layer with all of my flowers so you can see how they're starting to build up. And now I'm coming in with the third layer. This is another zigzag layer, and I'm coming in with my third darkest color. These are pretty easy to layer because see the little center of the flower that's still white? Each time I'm lining up around that, which makes it pretty easy, and we'll fill that in with yellow ink later on. Okay, now I'm on the final layer for the flower or for the outside petals of the flower, and then we can move on to the leaves. So this is just how I go about building up a collection of colorful stamped die cuts. So I did all of the leaf stamping off screen, and it was very easy to do following the guideline provided. Okay, so now that I have a bunch of flowers and a bunch of leaves stamped, let's incorporate those onto a card using the impressed backgrounds that we made earlier with our faux embossing folder technique. This is really fun, and I'm going to show you a trick that I use to make my die cuts look bigger than they are. I've created note cards that are top folding, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, and it's from Gina K Whisper cardstock, which is a soft, warm gray that works with just about anything. And I thought it'd be a great background for all of the cards that I'm making for this set. Now I wanted these impressed background pieces to look bigger. I wanted it to extend from the top of the note card to the bottom, because when I put my flowers on it, I didn't want to cover too much of it up. So I'm taking one and gluing it at the top, and I'm taking another and gluing it right below it. And I will position my flower die cuts over the seam to hide it. So I'm totally faking that I have a longer die cut than I actually do. So now I'm just going to use my scissors to cut the excess off, but I will save that piece for my next card. So each card that I'm doing needs 1 1/2 backgrounds using that faux embossing folder technique that I showed you earlier. Now I'm using foam squares to add my flower die cuts over the seam. And I'm just using a little bit of foam square because these cards will be handed to nurses and families and such, not going through the mail. So I don't have to worry about it getting crushed too much in transit. Okay, now for this leaf here, notice how a lot of the leaf is left? I cut it off, but I'm going to save that little bit of leaf for another card, and you'll see that. Now that I kind of have a plan for my card, I'm going to switch over to liquid adhesive. When I'm mass producing cards, I find using a liquid glue to be a little more economical. I don't have to use much of it, and it's really quick to put down. So now I'm doing the same process, but notice that die cut that's hanging off the bottom, that's left over from my last card. So again, I use 1 1/2 of those panels. Now this right here is that leftover leaf. Remember that leftover leaf we cut off? No one ever knows that it's only half a leaf when I tuck it behind a flower. So I like to extend my die cuts and try to use up as much of the waste as possible. Nobody will ever know you use these tricks, and it saves time and how many pieces you need. So I went ahead and I assembled all of my cards this way. So I have them in a bunch of different colors and multiples of each. Now I need a bunch of sentiment strips to add, and I'm going to share with you one of my favorite techniques for doing this quickly. I'm using the Altenew Sentiment Strips 2 stamp set. This is a brand new one with some unique sentiments in it. I'm mostly going to be using Stay Brave, Stay Strong, and I Appreciate Your Kindness, since these are going to healthcare heroes. I also used an older set. This is the Thinking of You stamp set, which has many messages of thinking of you and variations. And I thought these would be perfect for families who are struggling during this time. So I used a mix of these throughout the video. In the past, I've shown many tricks for stamping a bunch of sentiment strips, but this is my current favorite. I have one of my sentiments here, and I'm going to line it up with a grid in my stamping tool. So the sentiment is actually centered in a row of squares. So I know that it's straight. One row of those squares is actually 1/4 of an inch, which will help us cut these down later. So now I have some cardstock in my MISTI. I'm going to ink up my stamp with black ink. I like to stamp it lightly, just press it very lightly, and then look to see if it all transferred before pressing a little more firmly. Now I've moved my cardstock up 1/4 of an inch, which is just one square. Watch, I just move it up one square and stamp again. And I'll keep doing this for as many as I want. You can see how fast it is to shift it up one square and stamp it again. This technique that I'm showing you works well when you have a small sentiment that you want to add, one that fits in that 1/4 inch area. Okay, now I'm going to take my trimmer, and notice on the trimmer, these grid marks are also 1/4 of an inch. So I just move from grid mark to grid mark on the left edge of my cardstock there, and I cut each time. That way I know that my sentiment will be centered on the strips that I cut because of what I did on the MISTI. So I find this to be a huge time saver when I have a small sentiment like this one, a narrow sentiment. Now I have a bunch of these strips that I can just trim the sides down with scissors very quickly, and they're ready to add to our card. Now on this case, I wanted to stamp a few different sentiments. So I lined them all up within a row on the MISTI. I stamped them, and then I moved it up 3 rows each time to stamp again, because I have 3 rows of sentiments. And look how fast I'm able to do the same process here. Once again, I'll go over to my trimmer, and I'm going to move it each time on the left there, 1 grid line, and that will cut apart all of my sentiments perfectly. This is a huge time saver, and I hope you'll give it a try. It really works well. And now I have a handful of sentiment strips that I can add to these cards and others. And yeah, I will trim those down a bit later. Before I show you my completed cards, I wanted to show you the sequins that I'm using today. These are new from Altenew and really unique. There are 3 different sets. There is the satin gold, the white satin, and the antique gold. So those are the 3 that you see up there. I spilled them out on my desk so you could check them out. And my favorite happens to be the antique gold. It's got this kind of vintage feel to it that I felt went nicely on these. But I did mix up the ones I used, and I even used pearls on some of my examples. So here is a look at the completed cards. I'm just going to show you all of the ones I made so you can see the different positionings that I did. On some cards I put the flowers towards the top, some towards the bottom. Sometimes I added the sentiment strip below the flowers, sometimes on top of the flowers. It's fun to kind of change things up when you mass produce, so you can get a feel of what positioning you like of different things for future cards. Here you can see that beautiful faux embossing folder effect that we have in the background using the technique that I showed you earlier and how it matches up nicely with the flowers we added on top. On this one, I used, instead of a sentiment strip, a handwritten hello die cut from Altenew. It has the shadow die cut in white, and then the word hello itself die cut in black. But I think my favorite of these would be the one that says, I appreciate your kindness. You could even ink that differently, so you just ink up the words, I appreciate you. This is from that new Sentiment Strips 2 stamp set from Altenew, and I use that quite a bit on today's video. Here are the blue cards. Ah, man, I love that blue ink combination. I ended up with 2 that say thinking of you, which is something that you could use for anybody. That's one of the reasons I like that sentiment so much. And you can see how that light Arctic ink works really well for the impression in the background. For my 3rd blue card, I used the Stay Strong and Stay Brave sentiment. Thought this would be perfect for a nurse, and that is from that Altenew Sentiment Strips 2 stamp set that I showed you earlier. And here are the purple flowers that I created. This is a newer set of inks from Altenew, and I've been wanting to use it, and I really like the classical feel of it. I just think it's beautiful. And you can see the different sentiments that I used on them. Again, this is all about making many cards at once, and I can change up the sentiments very quickly. In fact, you could make more cards and leave the sentiment off. So you have a stash of cards without sentiments, then you can add, welcome baby or with sympathy or whatever you need at different times. And then I did one kind of teal color look here. You can see how beautiful that impression is on the background and how it adds a lot of interest to the card. Now I had a bunch of those impressed backgrounds left over that we did with the faux embossing folder technique. I wanted to show you the cards I made with the leftovers. I ran out of flowers, but I wanted to use these backgrounds. Here I glued some of the pieces onto a note card kind of at an angle and pieced them together. I added a hello die cut from Altenew, the fancy hello. I had die cut that twice from white cardstock and once from silver glitter cardstock, and I glued those together for a stacked look. I then added a thinking of you sentiment strip right below it. And I think this happens to be my favorite of all the cards, and I plan to do more of them. I also had a few of the blue impressions left over, so I made these 3 very quick cards. I used the fancy hello to die cut from Erin holographic cardstock. So it's a very simple card, but since I did a holographic cardstock on the die, it really catches your eye nicely. Very simple design, and I just used up leftovers. Now remember how earlier I showed there were 2 of those rose panel dies? I wanted to show you what they look like layered together. So I just die cut them and glued them together. No impression or faux embossing folder here. I just wanted to show you what it looks like. It's such a beautiful look. And I used a candy cane stripe die cut on the background for a white on white look. So this just shows you how the dies are intended to be used layered. But we stretched the look and did the faux embossing folder technique to get other cards too. So I just wanted to show you that just so you could see how it was originally intended to be used. Okay, let's move on to our next set of cards where I used a full background of that faux embossing folder technique. For this, I used the Altenew Precious Blooms stamp set, which is another new one. If you look at that top outline, it's 2 flowers. So this one comes together very quickly because the 2 flowers are done together. Now I went ahead and did the stamping off screen, did the same technique that I showed you earlier, the same red color inks that I showed you earlier also. And I ended up making 3 sets of the flowers and leaves for 3 different cards. I was really impressed with how easy these were to layer and how realistic they look. Next, I have the backgrounds that we created earlier. It had an impressed trim around the edge, but I decided to trim that off and add our background onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card that I created from Whisper cardstock. I then glued my flowers and leaves towards the top left. Again, I changed up the sentiments on all of them, but I wanted to show you this one with this banner. This is new from Altenew called the Envelope Art Stamp Set. And I thought it'd be fun for a banner going across our card, but you can also use this to decorate your envelopes. There are some great sentiments here that I plan to add to my envelopes after doing the video. Let me show you the guide for this because there are many ways you can use this. You can see how the banners can be built up in many different ways. You can make the flags go in different directions. You can make your banner 1, 2, or 3 tiers, or you could even do more if you wanted to. The 3-tier banner actually allows you to address on the front of your envelope using that. So you can write the address right in there. So this can be used in a lot of different ways. I'm just using it for a sentiment today. Here's the inside of the guide and all the different examples that they show. I really like the 3-tier for the envelope. I think that would be really fun to do. For today's card, I just wanted to create a banner with a sentiment. I've stamped the outline of the banner twice, and now I need to put the little flags on the end. Notice that in the set there are different flags that you can use based on how you want your banner to look. I just picked 2 ends that I thought would work for mine, and I'll stamp them on the 2 ends of the stamping that I've already done. I plan to go back and make several banners like this. Just stamp the banners but leave the center open so that I can add whatever sentiment I want to it later. This just really gives your sentiment a nice finished look. Okay, now that I have 2 banners stamped, I'm going to use that I appreciate your kindness sentiment because it fits nicely into that opening. I'm taking my Simon Says stamp Grid Transparency and laying it over the stamping because it kind of holds the stamp down as I position it in an arch. I then can stamp it and you can see how it arches nicely. If you don't have that grid transparency, any transparency would work. So I stamp that on the top one, then I'm going to shift my cardstock up and I'll stamp it on the second one. I always multiple ink up and stamp my sentiment because I like to stamp soft first and then build up the ink so I don't get a smooshed sentiment. Okay, for some of the other examples that I did, I used the Altenew Weekend Doodles stamp set. This little one that says Sending Happy Thoughts fits nicely into the center of a circle die cut. So here are the 3 different versions I came up with. Here's the one with the banner. I just glued it right across the flowers. This is a side opening card, and you can see the beautiful faux embossing folder background that we created earlier in this video. This was with a soft gray ink. I had done Morning Frost, which is a really warm, soft color ink that works great with just about any card, and it matches my Whisper Gray note card that I use perfectly. Here you can see the Sending Happy Thoughts on a circle die cut. I like using that because you can really put that circle die cut anywhere on a card. You could mat it if you want to, but I decided to keep it simple. And I thought this card could be perfect for absolutely anyone these days. Now on this version, if you look at the background, I did not use any ink when I did the faux embossing folder technique, so it's just a soft impression. I thought since this card had everything in the center, it'd be better to keep the background softer and more subtle. Okay, I have one more set of note cards for you today. In this case, I share a trick for extending your die cuts in another way. So for this, I used the Altenew Just Jasmine stamp set. Very easy to layer and it creates beautiful images. I did create these off screen. I just wanted to save the time in the video because it's pretty easy to line up. Now I have the triangle backgrounds that I created earlier already glued onto note cards. I wanted it to look like I had more pieces of stamping done than I really did. The stamp set comes with the one branch. But what I did is I trimmed down one of the branches to be that shorter one that you see. And by doing that, it looks like that I had more images to put on my card. So I'm going to glue down the full one here. Then I'm going to take this one that we cut down and glue it down kind of coming out from the side. Then we have that little piece that we had cut off of this one that I'll glue down to the bottom. No one will ever know we did that trick, and I can just use a white gel pen to cover up the stamping that I cut. So this is a great way to extend bigger images to look smaller. Okay, so I just added a Hugs die cut from the Hello and Hugs die set from Altenew and a With Caring Thoughts sentiment strip. So again, I used 2 stamp die cuts to create the flower arrangement, but I cut one of them down to get 2 pieces from it. And I did another card that I left the sentiment off so I could add something later when I need it. I think this will be for a baby card. I just wanted to show that stamp set in use really quickly because I thought it was beautiful and it went great with the faux embossing folder backgrounds that we created in the video earlier. All right, there you have a way you can really extend the life and use of your dies by creating faux embossing folders. I hope you'll try this. It works with a lot of different dies, so it's definitely worth the effort. And remember, you can keep that magnetic die cut piece in with your stamp set and use it over and over again in the future. Okay, if you're interested in any of the supplies that I used today, I do link them below in my YouTube description. I also have a link to that card class I talked about. And in the middle here, I have links to other videos that might be helpful, including doing a similar technique, but just using cardstock and vellum. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy, take care, and we'll see you soon.